Hi, everyone. Just getting everything set up. How's everybody doing this morning? I've been enjoying these last 3 days for sure. I hope you guys have been as well. Just a lot of really interesting stuff. I've learned so many things that I didn't know before, which is always really cool. So I'm really excited to be invited to join the presenters and present. But first, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Michelle Stevens. Like a decade or so ago, I was much more active in the hermit crab community. But my name at the time in those various communities was either Lola Granola or Naturally Crabby. I also went on, I had a blog and I had a store, an Etsy store, or an eBay store. Etsy really wasn't a thing yet. I'm not the same as the Naturally Crabby that is around now. So if you've heard of that, that's not me. But I just thought I'd introduce myself. For those of you that have been around for a while, you might remember. I don't have crabs anymore, though. I had them for a while, but I had kids really soon after we moved here in 2006, and I have a very old drafty house. What I found was in my colony tank, I was having a very difficult time keeping their temperature and humidity stable. And so eventually I just decided I wasn't really giving them the level of care that they needed to have. And so I sort of drifted away from the group, but now in the other part of my life, I am a professor of communication and theater in Illinois, and I specialize in communication. One of the things I specialize in is persuasion and negotiation. I'm also one of the 3 board members. So you've got Stacy, you've got Mary, and then sort of over here in the corner, there's me, and I'm sort of quietly doing my thing. So yeah, absolutely. Drafty houses. It's a nightmare. And my electricity in my old drafty house is also terrible. So it's difficult for us to take that level of electricity to really heat the crabbitat up to the point that it needs to be at. So I want to start off by talking about the science of persuasion, because while human beings are very different in some ways, in other ways, we're very, very similar. And humans have tendencies to behave similarly in different situations. And so when it comes to all different kinds of persuasion, and so not just like persuading people to change their minds about politics, but even things like persuading people to buy one product over another, people tap into those natural tendencies that human beings have to lean toward doing something or to shy away from doing something. And that sort of strange predictability is one of the things that we can leverage to our advantage when we are trying to advocate for literally anything, but particularly when it comes to advocating for animal care or animal rights. And so understanding the ways that people are influenced to change and the things that keep them from being receptive to change can really maximize your chances for success. And that ends up saving you a lot of time. It can save you a lot of emotional energy and personal energy. So we're going to talk about ways to maximize that. But I also want you to keep in mind that advocacy, particularly advocacy in challenging situations, is often much more about building relationships than it is about a one-time encounter with someone. Like I said, particularly, we're going to talk about easier advocacy situations versus really challenging advocacy situations. But a lot of times it's about just getting to know the person, letting them get to know you, and creating a relationship. If we're talking about pet stores like later, are you a customer of theirs? Or do you go in and do they ever see you purchasing things, or do you just come in this one time? And those kinds of things can influence the success that we have when we are out in the community. So as you are thinking about advocating, and I think that most hermit crab people at some point, when they get to a point where they say, these are the things that I was told, these things are wrong, and that these things are terribly wrong, right? And this is also where I'm going to mention, if you are a neurodiverse individual, right? People who are neurodiverse have a very heightened and black and white sense of right and wrong. And there is an intersectionality for people who are deeply committed to animals, not just hermit crabs, but other kinds of animals, and neurodiversity. There's a big intersection there. So it can feel very, very important, very like it doesn't make sense why they wouldn't do it, because it's not hard to do. You can change just a few things and really transform an experience. And so it feels like common sense, and it can feel like an affront to common sense and all that is right in the universe when someone goes, no, thank you. And so I want you to keep that in mind as well, because there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having that heightened sense of justice, but it's important to understand where that fits in what it is that you're trying to do. And that's where it's always best to start with a goal. Right? What is the goal for your advocacy plan, right? Are you, where are you going to go? What kind of mood are you trying to communicate in that relationship? Is this I'm trying to reach a lot of people? Is this, I'm trying to change this specific situation? And understand that the goal is how you're going to align everything that you're going to do. So you can have good goals, but you can also have goals that are less healthy, right? And sometimes a goal, we want to just go in and say, look at everything you're doing wrong. Like, look at this travesty. Look at this offense to the universe itself. And that's a goal that doesn't work, because realistically, our real goal is transformative change. And that may be, that's different for everyone, right? Claws in the classroom is a type of transformative advocacy, right? We're giving information to all of these people, usually before most of them get crabs, so that they can identify when they're in those situations, what's correct and what's incorrect. And so when you keep your goal in mind, that allows you to create all of the rest of the stuff that you're going to do. Are you going to give them something, like a handout or something? Right? And we'll talk a little bit later about the fire hose and what we do give them. We want to give them everything. We want to print out every article that we've ever read, and with charts and arrows and Post-it notes, and hand it to them and say, look, here's the proof. And that isn't always going to work out with whatever your goal is that you have in mind. The other thing about before you start is selecting where you want to advocate. And some of that is about prioritizing your time. I haven't met a single hermit crabber yet that's got a whole bunch of free time they're not using. Most of the time, I meet people who are doing more with less time constantly. And so there's nothing wrong with choosing where you think your time and energy is going to have the most impact, because it's also about your emotional energy. And we're going to talk about how that can get spent and how it can get spent really quickly. And in the end, it will end up working against you rather than for you as an advocate. So there are a lot of types of advocacy, but these are the two I see most common in animal rights situations. And one of them is fixing or correcting a situation that is incorrect, right? So these are people who have basically forced SeaWorld to shut down some of their areas, right? Because they, relentlessly campaigned to correct the wrong of, their orcas in captivity and things like that. The other type of advocacy, and I'm not going to call one negative and one positive because they all have their place, right? But the other one is I'm getting this information out to as many people as possible so that they have this information before they get to the stage where they've got a couple of hermit crabs in a plastic box with a sponge. Because we all know at that point, you're kind of past the point of no return, or else you've got to give the crabs to someone else. So when we talk about where you're going to advocate, and in a minute, I'm going to talk about pet stores specifically, but if we were talking about places you're most likely to have success, pet stores generally aren't that place, but we're going to talk about them. But other places you're going to have success. One of them is by connecting with influencers and advocates for adjacent species. Janie in her talk on social media had some really great examples of getting things to go viral and having them shared by other groups. There are some groups, snake groups, fish groups, insect groups, who are already deeply committed to correct care for their species, and they're going to understand that there are correct care that is probably misunderstood by the public for all of for our species. And so they might be willing to say a group with a YouTube page, and they're putting out videos. Maybe they're interested in putting out some videos on hermit crabs. So that would be that second kind of advocacy, where everything is getting distributed to the general public and all of their audience, which are more likely to be animal people as well. One of the things when we talk about pet stores is chain pet stores versus local pet stores, and both have their advantages and disadvantages. You're more likely to affect change in local pet stores than you are in chain pet stores, and we'll talk a little bit about why. Not always, though. Just because it's local doesn't mean they're going to be receptive to what you have to say. In your area, in your local area, you might have zoos, you might have just places, in the South specifically, have a lot more of like roadside attractions, or places where you might see exotic animals on display or something like that. So those might be people who are more open to communication. And like with crabs in the classroom, schools and libraries might also be really interested in that sort of sharing and spreading of advocacy. If you're looking for a place where you have a higher success rate than a place like PetSmart. So when it comes to advocating with a pet store, realistically, I consider going into a pet store kind of like going right into the boss fight. Right? If you're new at advocating, I recommend one of the other areas. Oh, another place where it's good to reach out is places that take in animals, animal rescue, humane societies. They will often be contacted by people who have hermit crabs, but they're not going to take them. But if you can create a relationship with those groups, you might be able to funnel those crabs, or you can even say, if you will take them, I'll provide you with what you need to care for them correctly, and things like that. So that's another high success rate. Okay. Pet store advocacy is a long road to hoe. And I think it's one of the first places that people want to go when they say, I'm going to advocate. I'm going to march down to my pet store and I'm going to tell them, this gravel is not okay. This sponge is not okay, and they need to fix it. And that's going to lead to a lot of heartbreak really quickly. When it comes to big chain stores, a lot of times the person you're talking to has no power over what they're supposed to, of what you're telling them. You can tell them and they could 100% agree with you, but what gets ordered and how they're told to display it and things like that, they probably don't have the authority to change that setup, particularly in a national chain. So if you're talking to a mom and pop shop, then you do want to make sure that you are talking to the decision maker, or if you're talking to an employee, that you are treating it like that kind of conversation, and maybe feel out if an employee can give you a lot of great information if the owner is receptive to that sort of thing or not receptive. Pet store contact can fizzle out really quickly if they feel insulted. And here's the thing. We don't actually have to be insulting for a person to feel insulted. We're actually much more personally sensitive, particularly if someone suggests that we are doing something wrong. It can create a disproportionate amount of negative feeling and shutting down than you're actually doing in the moment, right? You may not mean it all. You may, especially if you are a very direct person like me, you may just be saying the truth. But the person who you're talking to is hearing a very different kind of message. And that's why it's really important to keep your goal in mind when you're advocating. What is my goal? My goal is to create an environment where a person feels comfortable making a change in the way they're doing things. I want you to think about the pet store employee. They're selling a lot of different kinds of animals. You, Mr. or Mrs. Hermit Crab advocate, are not the only advocate that is visiting this store, right? Because for every kind of animal, there is an advocate that believes the pet store is not doing them justice. And realistically, they also might think that you just don't understand how pet stores work. And this is a really common one, right? Because we have care guidelines about how many inches of substrate they should have. And a pet store is going to say, I'm not going to put that substrate in there. I need the people to be able to see the crabs so that they can buy them and things like that. And so they think, I don't need to listen because I'm doing things fine because this is temporary, rather than because this is the wrong way to do it. So let's say that you're still like, I have some pet stores, Michelle, I need to visit these pet stores and I need to talk to them. So let's talk about how to be successful. Just because it's the boss fight doesn't mean you should never take it on, right? And I will say, though, that big chains like PetSmart and Petco are going to be more influenced by big grassroots kind of social media pressure, right? That it needs, they're not, one person coming into a store and talking is not as effective as them saying this thing is getting a lot of bad press and maybe we need to make some changes. So if you're going into a business or an organization, you're going to want to first pick a day of the week that is quiet. And if you happen to, maybe you pick Tuesday morning, great time to go in. And maybe you walk in and then you realize they just got a huge shipment of stuff. You're going to walk back out again, right? You need to find a time when they are not swamped with people and not, visually super swamped with jobs. And so you know that they've got a minute or 5, and you don't want this conversation to go on a really long time, especially if you're the one initiating the talking. Either make sure you're talking to the decision maker, ask about the decision maker, or if you know you're not talking to the decision maker, make sure that you're not treating this person like they are the decision maker. Keep in mind, most people get into the pet store business, even as part-time employees, because they have some kind of a pet they really liked, right? I've never met a pet store employee or owner that didn't have one kind of pet that was at this store that was their special interest, right? That they knew everything about. And so if you keep that in mind, a lot of times, if you understand that they are just less knowledgeable and maybe don't have the same kind of resources that you do, you can create a relationship. So the last thing you want, one of the things that's difficult for when you know a lot about something is understanding how much more you know than other people. And so in those early encounters, you need to connect to things that you find are potentially common ground. Does this pet store not sell animals that are wild caught? Then maybe that's the technique where you mentioned, I don't know if you know this, but hermit crabs are wild caught. Like I noticed you don't have, this kind of fish or this kind of fish or this kind of fish that's really common. There are a lot of pet stores that have a line right there and may not realize that hermit crabs interact with or can contradict that. Dan is absolutely right with, when it comes to money, this is a business. And so one of the things that you can do is when you can talk about goals, look at their store, know what they sell there. You can say, I could help you create a list that has, these are all things you already sell. A lot of hermit crab supplies have overlap with other pets. They generally don't have to add a lot of stuff, but you can say this list will help sell more products when you are when or you can also ask them, hey, could you order this product and then buy it from them, right? It is a business, and sometimes, sad but true, the money is the perspective that is going to help them stay more focused while you tell them the rest of the stuff. So everyone is a little bit different. Okay, it's Advocacy Day. Everybody's going to go down and advocate for hermit crabs wherever they've decided to go. So the first thing, you want to revisit your goal, whatever your goal was, right? Maybe your goal was to share information. Maybe it was to help inspire them to transform their setup, whatever those things are. And then take a moment to orient yourself to the perspective of the person that you're going to visit. What is their situation like? No matter where we go, no one has been to a brick and mortar store that is all hermit crabs, right? So they've got all different kinds of pets, probably fish. They've got a lot of things that they're managing and a lot of animals that they're overseeing. So think about that person working in that job. And if it was you and someone walked up to you and they wanted to tell you about something that you were maybe doing wrong, how would that approach go in a way that would keep you receptive to staying engaged? Because humans have a really bad habit of getting shut down. However, don't misinterpret not having an instant success as it not working. The other thing that people have to do, especially if it's about changing their minds, is it's almost like, our little primate self wants to take this new idea and this new evidence back home and mull it over. Very few people will change their mind in the moment, right? They might need to go and I'm going to have to look this up. I'm going to do a little more research. So allow for that to happen. Don't feel like it's only successful if they have some sort of remarkable transformation in the moment. That almost never happens. And you're going to meet people who don't want to hear it. They're going to say, no, thanks, bye. And that's going to say to you, I don't want to interact with you. I don't want to hear about this. I want you to go away. And you know what? Just turn around and walk away. And don't let that get to a personal place. But also notice if you are letting that. Because once it starts feeling personal, the advocacy is not going to be the experience that you want it to be. We can only, it doesn't even matter if we're expecting it. Rejection can be a very personal experience. It can hurt, even if you don't, even if you're like, no, I'm fine. Like after a while, it's difficult. So when you are out there, I don't like to dwell on negativity, but I think sometimes our first impulse when it comes to this isn't always the strongest one. And this is to everybody, but also to my neurospicy folks out there. Don't monopolize their time. And one of the ways that, because I am a neurospicy myself, one of the ways that I do this is I will talk a little bit in the beginning, and I will then use their cues to tell me how much more time they want to talk. And I will generally try to keep it at about 5 minutes, unless they are continuing to engage the conversation by asking questions or telling me stories. If they're talking, that's a great situation where you can stay and continue to engage. If they're driving the conversation, people will withdraw and shut down when they want you to leave. We have a lot of good nonverbal cues to tell people that. So if they're like looking around you and like, oh, what was that? They're giving you cues that say, I'm done with this conversation now. And so as much as we might, and the lecture the rant thing, very few people go in and are just like super negative, but it can be cathartic to laundry list things that are wrong. And sometimes they're very, very wrong. And sometimes they're wrong to the point of just flat out cruelty. But keeping it focused on things in a positive way is your best opportunity to keep the person you're talking to from shutting down. One of the things that you can do is, if you do have some desperate suggestions, you can reframe them as positives. A lot of times, if you reframe yourself as someone who just recently started figuring out a lot of cool stuff, and some of you are, that can be really helpful. So instead of saying your crab's going to die if you don't give it salt water, you can say something like, I can't believe how active my crabs were once I offered them salt water so that they could get water in their shell, and leave it at that. Put the idea in their head. People who are beginning to be moved by advocacy often will then go and do a lot of research on their own, which can be really helpful. I also want to make something clear here too. If you are out doing in-person advocacy, particularly if you are not 18 or older, but regardless of your age, don't let the desire to help crabs put you in situations that are unsafe, right? So if you are at someone's store and they invite you to go into the back room, generally don't, not if you're alone, unless you know for a fact that you can trust those people. Don't invite people to your house, even if they're dropping things off, even if your parents are going to be there or things like that. It's just not a good idea. There are people out there that do things specifically to get contact information. So if you have contact information that you give people, like maybe you have a Google Voice number or something like that, or if you are going to have things mailed to you, getting a PO box, those are all things that really highly recommend. You can't be too safe with the internet. And then if you're in a situation, any kind of situation, if it feels off, call it off. There's nothing rude about saying, I don't feel comfortable, I'm going to leave now, just walking away and leaving. If you trust your own instincts, we have instincts for a reason. And so always make sure that you are putting your own safety and the safety of the people you're with first. After you have completed your advocacy, it's really important to sit down, especially if these are the early ones for you, and assess how it went. Was there parts of it that worked better? Were there things where you noticed they were more receptive at certain times or less receptive at certain times? Could there have been something that you did better? Do you feel like this is something where they might be open to having you come back and talking again? Or is it something that you don't want to do again? Advocacy is really personal. And if you have, not everybody is comfortable going out and talking to strangers, right? For some people, it's the last thing that they would want to do, to get in a situation where they have to try to talk to someone. It's sort of like some people don't like to talk on the phone, same kind of thing. But that doesn't mean that there's no advocacy options for you. Even in this conference, we've learned about a lot of them. Right, Allison had the urban shell shopping talk, which is a really great way to a nice type of activism where you can send shells back. Facilitating crabs in the classroom or donating to crabs in the classroom is a great way to advocate, but also facilitating it in your local area. Coming to conferences like this and telling other people about conferences like this can be really great. And if you have a social media presence, then you can also signal boost positive messaging that helps educate the public. Corinthian, I absolutely agree. When I was watching Jani's session, I really felt like there was a lot of good stuff there as well when we were talking about how we communicate with different people. I saw somebody in the chat ask about souvenir stores. They're probably harder, I think, I would make them even a bit harder than pet stores. And over the years, even back then, but now too, it seems like souvenir shops are already sort of hardened against people coming up to them and saying, this is not good. And it just seems like I hear people getting a like a kind of an abrupt response, and you're never going to be able to get through to people like that. It might be, is this souvenir store owned by a person? Is it part of a chain of these? And so, it might be, right, if you can, I think we've bad pressed a lot of crab events from existence, right? Places that were, crab races and places that were giving out hermit crabs as promotional stuff. There's been a lot of situations where a info campaign was able to intervene, and that may be the level we have to reach with souvenir shops. Are they owned by locals? Are they owned by a chain? Is this a store that is owned by somebody in a different country? Is it so finding out what those things are and giving and seeing if you can leverage the techniques that make sense. But otherwise, you'd almost have more luck like putting a sandwich board on and standing out front, protesting and hoping to get the news to signal boost that. But souvenir shops are a terrible challenge. When I first started getting crabs, most malls had a cart that was filled with hermit crabs. And I think that there was a big influx of hermit crabs during that time, all based on these mall carts. Does anybody remember the mall carts? I know Stacy remembers the mall carts. And there'd be, several hundred of them in this like open air cart in the middle of the mall. And Jessalyn, I would say reaching out is not a bad idea, but I would also say protect your heart because they might not be interested. When you think about so for a mom and pop shop that's selling hermit crabs in a 10-gallon tank over by their fish, accepting our advocating is pretty easy because they only have to adjust a few things. They can add a few things. They can do eco earth instead of gravel. It's not great, but now they have both kinds of water. And there's been a lot of people who can get pet stores to do that level of thing. To get the souvenir stores to stop doing it, you are literally having to convince someone to remove this entire revenue stream that is a really big part of the tradition of going to the beach. And if they're still selling, then they're going to keep selling. And it's unfortunate that that's true, but it just is what it is. Until we make it taboo enough that it just looks terrible, they're going to continue to do it, partially because of the same nostalgia. We still have people getting hermit crabs, like grandma's getting hermit crabs for the kids and things like that. Actually, one of the ways that I advocate is I am a speech teacher and a theater teacher, but in my speech class, my example persuasive speech is a persuasive speech about why the importation of hermit crabs should be banned. And so I use that for all of the assignment examples. And so basically saying they need to be classified and no longer imported into the United States for the pet industry. And then I'm able to use strong sources. And so for me, I probably teach, like 15 different speech classes a year with 20 students in each class. And so for me, every single student goes through and they have to read all about hermit crabs and, why we shouldn't be importing them before they're able to do their assignment. So that's one, so if you're in high school and you're taking a speech class, you can give your speech about something like that and you can advocate that way. It's really one of those things where you have to take your own situation and also the kinds of places you have around you and also what your strengths and weaknesses are. right? See a lot of people in the chat talking about not purchasing crabs because they're in a bad situation. And it's so hard to not do that. And yes, I agree with everyone that's saying, don't purchase crabs. There are some situations where pet stores have given sick crabs to people to try to save. I'm pretty okay with that situation because they're not getting any revenue from it. They're being written off as died. When I talk to people about hermit crabs, I generally stick to one of three talking points. One of them is wild caught. One of them is lifespan. Right. And I think those are two of the most important, particularly. And then the other one is mortality rate during shipping. Right. And I really will frame it as, for every living crab that makes it into a pet store, there are 8, or for every 2 crabs, there are 8 dead crabs. Right, because we have about an 80% mortality rate. So then if those crabs were in painted shells, we then have their original 8 shells that were most likely destroyed in the painted shell transition process. And then the 8 shells that have been ruined because they've been painted. So for each 2 crabs that are in a pet store, 8 crabs died and 16 shells were lost. Right. And that's how you have to think about it. When you're thinking about, maybe I can just save this one. You're not saving that one. You're condemning 10 more crabs, potentially, 8. You're condemning 8 of them for 2 that might live. In either way, you've got 16 shells that have been destroyed for those 2 crabs. Right. So it's tricky. And that's why I love the idea of urban shelling. I love the idea of signal boosting, particularly if you are more active in some of the social media that's more likely to go viral. If you're sort of an old dinosaur like me, who's still more of a YouTube kind of person. By the way, the audio crab, there's a video out there of mine of crabs. It's got a really loud audio. You are all more than welcome to use that audio in TikToks or anything, as long as you just point it back to Lycos, and give some, get that out there. It was a really wonderful opportunity. It was before cell phones or anything like that, and I actually had a little dictation recorder, and I could hear them from across the room. And I came over, and these 2 guys, 2 of my jumbos, were so mad at each other. They didn't even move. They were just right there, and they were waving their antenna, and it was just going like crazy. And so I stuck the digital recorder down right in between them, like I was getting an interview, and they just went to town. It was fantastic. So please, you have my blanket permission to use that. Please, the more we can get out there, the better. Kathy, it's on YouTube. If you just Google hermit crab chirping, it's one of the first ones to come up. It's got a picture of a crab in a terrible painted shell, but it was just like the picture I took of it right before I put it into the quarantine tank after I'd gotten home. It was a donated one. I still get messages, painted shells are terrible. It's like, he wouldn't leave the painted shell. Does anybody have any other questions? I think that's the end of my talk. Anything specific or stories you've had, things that worked well for you? Also, but do protect your mental health and everything. If you're going in, and someone is rude to you or something like that, let it go. Don't take it to heart. And remember, sometimes people are just jerks. Like some people are just jerks, and you just got to let go and not put your energy in that direction. Yeah, it's true. Once people know you're a crabber, they will tell you the most horrible stories. I'm not going to share the ones that have been shared with me, but it's just like, why? Why would you tell me that? You know, exotic pet shows are another great place for us to advocate. And I know it's one of the things that Stacy's been doing. But again, there's also, I think there's a really nice place called Snake Discovery that I'm working to. I would love for them to do an episode about hermit crabs as well, because their care episodes are also good. So that's my ultimate goal, is to get Snake Discovery to do a hermit crab video. But again, you know, these are organizations that have enormous followings, and people who are into it enough to go to a reptile conference are going to spread the word, and they're going to be interested in what makes a good hermit crab habitat as well. Right. I saw the Snake Discovery had a short thing once too. I was like, oh my gosh, are they going to talk about it? But then they did not. So we definitely, that would definitely be a cool kind of crossover. I'd love to go up to their store. It's not terribly far from here. I'm in Illinois, because I suspect, especially now that they've got the store, I'd love to see them put a list of Crabitat stuff like on their website or something like that, so people can go and make sure they're getting the right kind of stuff. Other questions? We got done a little bit early. Everybody can go get some more coffee. I've got mine. Oh, Stacy, this is my classroom too, by the way. I came in because the Wi-Fi is better here. So these are my classroom plants. They feed on student speech fear. Thank you all very much. You're always feel free to reach out to me if there's anything you have questions about or things like that. I'd be happy to answer anything, any questions you have. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of the conference.